Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gabester here. This is the Mythic Brackenspore Tank Guide. And this encounter for tanks is fairly similar to the normal and heroic version, except the damage intake is extremely high, particularly from the Flesh Eater ad. And there are two new Mythic mechanics that you won't be used to. But in terms of the actual handling of the majority of the fight, it's mostly just about management of your own personal cooldowns and appropriately tank swapping so that the damage can be mitigated as much as possible. So let's get started. So the two new abilities are Call of the Tides and Exploding Fungus. And right away you'll see Exploding Fungus going off here. And this is just a short cast time for Brackenspore, during which he's not hitting the tank, which is an important note. During the cast, he will spawn all these little tiny fungus out of the ground in random locations. And after the 6-second cast ends, all of them will explode simultaneously in a small radius around their location. So it's really important that even as a tank, you really watch your feet when this is occurring and make sure you aren't standing on top of one. Call the Tides, which you see happening right here, is a series of waves that will come from the water, of course, and go across the room. The important thing to remember about Call of the Tides is that it will have random gaps in, where it breaks, essentially, where you can go through. And these gaps are either going to be one large chunk, which are referred to as the middle, or two smaller chunks or gaps, which we refer to as a split. So with that said, it's important that you watch closely when the waves are coming in, because the draw distance on the waves can be quite short. So even after they're spawning, if you're far enough away, you may not see them for a while. And even as a tank, it's important you dodge them. If you get hit, it will do some damage, but more importantly, it will knock you away. And I believe it does anyway. And it will position you improperly because the rest of the raid will not be near you since they're dodging the wave. This is, marginally critical for Brackenspore, but it's really critical for the Flesh Eater positioning. So if you're taking the Flesh Eater and you soak up a wave on accident and you have, somebody that's trying to interrupt that's in melee, this can be a very big problem. So it's really critical, just like everyone else, that you dodge the waves and just go to whichever gap is the one that the raid's going to. Of course, being careful not to get everyone breathed on if you're tanking Brackenspore. And I should briefly mention that you can find in the description the links to some of the weak auras from our wiki that I'm using in the video here. So this will alert you for when things like when exploding fungus or Call the Tides happen and stuff like that. So probably the most important rule for tanking on this fight is the ABCs. Always be closing in on a mushroom. In other words, always be looking where the current helpful mushrooms are, a living mushroom or rejuvenating mushroom, and be positioning yourself and therefore the boss or the Flesh Eater to that location, because the raid as a whole is going to be moving there almost immediately or very soon in the near future, and you want to be there. This is particularly important to think about in terms of both the breath attack from Brackenspore, because the sooner you move toward the next living mushroom, the sooner you can be stationary with him and not have to think about breath positioning. You can just face him to the outside of the room, essentially, away from the raid, on top of the location, so like you see there, on top of the living mushroom, and not have to think about whether you're facing him towards somebody that's going to get hit. Similarly, the same would apply to both Brackenspore and the Flesh Eater for getting into the rejuvenated mushroom. So obviously, the haste benefit in particular is really good for DPS to get a lot of extra burst damage necessary to kill the fight. And this applies to attacking both Brackenspore and the Flesh Eater. But since the Flesh Eater doesn't have a facing requirement position thing, that particular tank can start moving right away regardless of breath timing, of course. So regardless, you should just always be thinking about where is the next mushroom spawned relative to where I am, especially the facing if you're tanking Brackenspore at the time, and when can I start moving over there. So you want to have a real close eye on that location, as well as the timer for the next breath from Brackenspore, and of course your rot stacks if you're tank swapping at the time as well, so that you can start moving over there and get in position as soon as possible, essentially. So I want to take a bit to talk about the Flesh Eater and how you handle tanking that. Mechanically, it's no different than on Heroic or even normal, but the damage that this thing deals is extreme. The main reason is because it has so much health, and your DPS output when you first start progressing on this will probably be relatively low. And even if all your DPS focus on the Flesh Eater while handling the other mechanics as they're supposed to do, it's going to live for quite a while. We saw some instances where it would get 6 stacks or more, and at that stack level, the Flesh Eater is going to hit a tank before mitigation of around 200,000 damage. Or I shouldn't say before mitigation. This is after armor reduction, but without any blocking or anything. So if you have a tank that doesn't have guaranteed blocks while they're taking the Flesh Eater, then this could be a string of 200,000 plus hits. And we saw a couple times, more than one actually, that our tank just got completely destroyed. So you're going to need severe cooldowns or call for major healing if you're taking the Flesh Eater at those stack levels. Brackenspore himself is actually quite simple and low damage to tank outside of his breath. And of course the breath is well known. You can see it casting, so you can plan ahead very easily and use a minor cooldown if you aren't full health or whatever. But other than that, it's all about the Flesh Eater tanking. To that end, depending on your actual class as a tank, you may find Flesh Eater tanking much easier, much more difficult. Paladins can be very difficult to keep alive while you're taking Flesh Eaters at high stacks, because if you get a string of missed block opportunities, those hits will just go straight through. Monks work great because of their ability to mitigate pretty much every hit and then just stagger the damage off. Death Knight's pretty good. You can, of course, take the hit, but then immediately heal yourself, pop an absorb to give your healers time to, recover your health and whatnot. Tough to say. I haven't experienced anything with warriors or guardian druids, how they would do. I suspect druids would actually be quite good. I believe they have absorbs based on the damage they take, so that's similar to blocking. Anyway, like I said, if you are kind of a weaker tank for taking those potential unmitigated hits, you need to plan your cooldowns accordingly. Probably using more cooldowns to tank the high stack Flesh Eater when it's your turn than actually on Brackenspore's breath, because it's just the unknown factors with the melee hits that are the problem. So believe it or not, that really covers everything that's new for Mythic tanking on Brackenspore. Overall, like I said, it's almost identical to what you're used to mechanically from the earlier difficulties. Most of the minor changes that are necessary to actually successfully do this fight are handled by other raid members, healers, DPS, particularly the flamethrower DPS, but also dealing with the spore shooters and all that good stuff. These are all intricacies that tanks just simply aren't going to be involved with, so you don't have to think about them. The main things, like I said, are always watching for those mushroom locations so you can position yourself quickly so that you aren't in a situation where the raid is popping a rejuvenating, for example, and you're nowhere near it with one of your mobs, and you're getting a lot of wasted DPS time. You can help to interrupt the Flesh Eater, but since you are required to tank swap pretty frequently while a Flesh Eater is active, it may not be reliable enough. Even if you use a focus macro, for example, to interrupt, that'll be helpful as a backup, and I would recommend it, but it's not going to be something that you can be relied upon to do when you're tank swapping with your tank partner. So you're going to need one or two other people to actually be watching for those interrupts. Anyway, that should cover everything for the tank guide for Mythic Brackenspore. As always, good luck, thanks for watching, and see you next time.